The dawning hours had once again beckoned me from sleep. As I shuffled my way downstairs, each step I took was cautious, deliberately curling my toes to keep my slippers from falling off, a habitual act due to their proclivity for escaping my feet. The morning cold had already claimed its dominion throughout the house, asserting a dominance that felt both ancient and unsettling. I sometimes thought that this coldness predated our very existence in this place. The windows, touched by Jack Frost's breath, bore a hazy film of ice, but even that didn't obscure the lurking shadows and whispering trees outside. Their ghostly silhouettes danced, casting both light and sound into quiet obscurity. Most people find comfort in the soft glow of streetlights and the muted cacophony of a waking world, so familiar that they're as invisible as the bridge of your own nose. Here, however, in this place, there was an absence of such conveniences. Instead, an enveloping darkness reigned, pressing against the walls of our home from all sides, as if the universe itself was attempting to snuff out our meager existence. A muttered prayer escaped my lips as I reached for the kitchen light switch, instantly banishing the shadows as the room swelled with light. Time hadn't been kind to the interior. It bore the scars of years gone by with moth-eaten drapes and weathered furnishings. But then again, there was hardly a need for curtains. After all, there was nothing outside to shield our eyes from, only endless void. Dominating one wall, the mounted head of a stag stared blankly, its fur now dull and unkempt. Children, perhaps from another time, seemed to have left their mark on it. One of its proud antlers snapped, the missing piece forever lost. The table, aged and bearing the memories of countless meals, stood firm, a testament to a past handyman who had repaired it with a wooden block. Generators had always been fickle things. The house's aging generator had a habit of shutting down, often pulling my father from sleep to navigate the bowels of our home, to breathe life back into it. He tried teaching me the process, tugging at cords and adjusting knobs. But the truth was, the basement held fears no lesson could abate. While reason told me there were no monsters lurking, no spectral apparitions floating in its cold air, the very thought of descending into its darkness made my skin prickle in primal fear. Instincts aren't just ancient remnants. They often hold kernels of truth. And so, it was best left to my father. Back in the kitchen, with the bulb above casting a brave glow against the aging walls, I was drawn to the deck outside. Bathed in the soft luminescence from the room, I could see evidence of last night's rain. The time-worn wood, now damp and glistening, had seen better days, yet held stories untold. Moss and time had claimed parts of it, telling a tale of nature's relentless encroachment. The deck, only a short distance from the insistent reach of the encroaching weeds, bore the marks of neglect. My mother had once been their diligent warden, but after countless skirmishes with the resilient green invaders, she'd resigned herself to a monthly battle. I smirked at the thought, feeling a tinge of gratitude that I hadn't been roped into that particular chore. Turning my attention back to the task at hand, I filled our old kettle. The water was pristine, a luxury we couldn't always take for granted in this isolated abode. As I set the kettle down and watched the orange indicator light flicker to life, a familiar tune emerged from the depths of my memory. It danced on the edge of my consciousness, escaping any effort to attach words to the melody. A slow roll of boiling began behind me, but, true to my morning ritual, I'd wait for the full crescendo of the kettle's whistle, for the steam to dance gracefully towards the ceiling before moving. Opening a cupboard with an all-too-familiar creak, I retrieved my favorite baby blue mug. The unmistakable sound of coffee granules meeting ceramic was almost musical, and the rich aroma that wafted up when boiling water poured over them was nothing short of hypnotic. I had abandoned the idea of adding milk some time ago. Our sporadic deliveries, with gaps as long as 2 months, meant that alternatives like UHT, soya, oat, or almond milk became our staples. But there was an unwritten rule in our household. If you emptied the carton, you fetched the next one from the stock in the dreaded basement. Not today, I thought. That particular adventure was one I wasn't keen to embark upon. I winced at the too familiar burn of an impatient sip of coffee, swiftly followed by the bite of a biscuit, hoping its sweetness might offer solace to my scorched tongue. My immediate morning rituals concluded, I extinguished the kitchen light and made my way back up, leaving the stillness of the room and the sleeping deck to the reluctant embrace of dawn. Ascending the stairs, I treaded lightly, mindful of the creaky steps that betrayed footsteps in the quiet of pre-dawn. I didn't need the ire of waking anyone prematurely. My fingers grazed the faded wallpaper lining the corridor, its once vibrant tulips now yellowed and sagging from years of exposure. Instead of turning into my room, however, I found myself drawn to the attic door. Curiously, while basements held a certain eerie reputation in tales of horror and mystery, the attic had always been a place of solace for me. No cold stone walls or networks of age-worn pipes here. Instead, it bore the same wallpaper as the landing and was home to remnants of our past. Furniture that held the stories and dust of years gone by. It was in this quiet space, amidst memories and nostalgia, that I often found moments of introspection and calm. In the midst of all this stood an old, tired-looking couch, its brown fabric wearing thin and fraying at the edges. Directly in front of it lay a rug, which, truth be told, I had never had the courage to lift. I shuddered at the thought of what hue the floor beneath it might possess, as the visible flooring held a murky tint, bearing little resemblance to its original vibrant shade from years long past. The attic, built in an era before the advent of electricity, had wiring added only after its initial construction. This explained the lack of overhead lights. Instead, natural light streamed in from a single window that dominated one end of the room. Over time, its once clear pane had suffered a chip and numerous cracks, rendering it a mere shadowy aperture, its view punctuated by the distant twinkle of stars. Next to this window was a curious high-backed chair. One of its legs, replaced in a makeshift manner, always reminded me of makeshift solutions in unexpected places. I had checked every nook and cranny of this chair, and beside it stood a quaint end table. Its dark, chapped veneer held a time-weathered doily, and atop that doily was a lamp that never failed to amuse me. Something about the lamp's design was whimsically off-kilter. A sizable triangular piece was missing from its base, with hairline fractures emanating from the breach, resembling creatures fleeing a predator's maw. The true comedic element, however, was its lampshade. Grossly disproportionate, it appeared more suited to encompassing a planet than casting a warm, ambient glow. Time had coated it in a layer of grime and neglect, but I still found charm in its idiosyncrasy. Flicking it on, I retrieved my book, always stashed safely beneath a cushion. I remember the time when I had romanticized the idea of this serene retreat. Having grown up ensconced in the hustle and bustle of urban life, the peace and quiet here initially felt like a dream realized. But it's intriguing how swiftly one's perspective can shift. Soon, I began to yearn for the very urban features I once considered mundane. The soft glow of streetlights, or the familiar hum of passing vehicles. Yet, with just over 2 months remaining in our half-year sojourn, I had committed to soaking in every moment, to fully appreciate the beauty around me. As I lost myself in the pages of my book, the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky outside. The gentle embrace of a soft pink hue heralded the promise of a warm, sunny day. Perhaps, I mused, once the morning dew retreated, it might be a perfect day for a little outdoor escapade with my sister. Closing my book with a soft thud, I realized my engrossment in the narrative had caused me to neglect the remnants of my coffee and the last biscuit. I hesitated for a moment before sipping the now cold coffee. The chill was as jarring as the earlier burn I'd subjected myself to. But then, with an irrational sense of urgency, as if fearing someone might steal away my forgotten treat, I quickly devoured the biscuit. With a spontaneous movement, I shoved the entire biscuit into my mouth, savoring its crumbling texture as memories of our initial journey here flowed back. When we had first embarked on this voyage, winter's cold fingers had reached out in a particularly harsh embrace. Our drive from home had been under the weighty shadow of storm clouds, which, by the time we reached the military transport ship, had unleashed their torrential anger upon us. Our destination was a nondescript island, known only for an old lab, as my father affectionately labeled it. The island's inhabitants were an eclectic bunch. They hardly looked the part of scientists. Yet they were involved in experiments deemed too risky for the mainland. Father, noticing my widening eyes filled with curiosity, assured me that nothing covered was afoot. His fleeting gesture towards the raging sea and turbulent skies was all the indication I needed that our home lay yonder. We spent a restless night there, the four of us huddled in a single room. The only source of warmth was a constantly humming heater, attempting to fend off the cold that tried to seep through the drumming rain on the steel roof. As dawn broke, and the weather granted us a brief respite, we boarded a seaplane that looked every bit as fragile as I felt. I remember clutching a flask of warm coffee, while the noise-canceling headsets dulled the roar of the engine and the biting wind, replacing it with the pilot's jovial banter with my father. Upon landing, our new home stood amidst a panorama of snow-covered mountains, its frost-kissed grasslands shimmering in the pale light. The previous occupants had departed just 2 days prior, ensuring the house was warm and welcoming. It was during these early days that I discovered the attic, its window frosting over, constricting the view outside. Yet, as the weak sunlight broke through, unveiling a mist-laden spectacle over the hills, a realization settled in. Half a year in such a place might not be so taxing after all. With time, the relentless winter relinquished its grip, revealing a verdant sprawl of trees previously obscured by its icy shroud. In compensation for our frosty welcome, nature treated us to a visual symphony of blooming flowers stretching out endlessly. These fields culminated in dense forests that nestled at the mountain's base and climbed determinedly towards its peak. The trees now stood tall, basking in the sun's golden embrace. Reaching under the end table, I grappled with its stubborn drawer, which in many ways felt more like a trial of one's physical prowess than a mere storage space. After a near-epic tussle, I extracted a pair of binoculars, resolving to leave the drawer ajar. Considering the challenge of shutting it without a commotion, I focused on the landscape below. The island wasn't teeming with wildlife, but there were animals aplenty, left here to graze and provide a backup food source should supply drops fail. Thankfully, such dire circumstances had arisen only once, and even then, relief had arrived swiftly. Despite this, I relished scanning the terrain, hoping to spot wandering sheep or birds that chose to alight here. Occasionally, filled with adventurous spirit, my sister and I would trek to the edge of the forest, collecting bugs or counting bird nests, delighting in every small wonder the island presented to us. To tease my sister, I would often spin tales about a family of bears residing on the island. These tales never failed to strike a chord of fear in her heart. Yet, as I looked out, what always caught my eye was the pristine beauty of the dew-kissed landscape. It seemed as though nature had donned her jewelry, each dewdrop reflecting a myriad of colors like precious stones in a monarch's treasury. There was an undeniable sense of pride swelling within me. After all, only a select few had ever been privy to these sights. I'd often mused about the flora's history, wondering if my touch upon the bark of a tree or the fragrance of an unfamiliar flower brushing past my nostrils was its very first human encounter. It was a surreal sensation, knowing that in that moment I was possibly connecting with something untouched by mankind. The fresh scent of the earth after rain, the alluring petrichor, hinted that the day was ripe for exploration. I considered trekking to the mountaintop, capturing the breathtaking views with my camera to share with friends back home, or to upload on social media platforms, once we were back in the embrace of reliable cellular signals. The island's dense foliage was thickening, yet I felt reassured by my father's words that if one continued on a downward path, the boundaries of the forest would soon give way, revealing our temporary abode. Following the babbling brook, which was our primary source for drinking water and also catered to our household needs, I watched it snake upwards towards the mountain. The brook, which would turn into an icy pathway in winter and often overflowed during heavy rainfall, looked particularly tumultuous today. Its white frothy surface resembled faded, age-old scars. But as I traced its path, a sudden bone-chilling sensation gripped me. I found myself dropping the binoculars in sheer terror. It felt like an eternity before the binoculars hit the ground. Every nerve in my body seemed to be firing in panic. I was convinced that for the briefest moment, I had seen a figure by the stream. This entity appeared starved, its pale flesh stretched over protruding bones, hands cupping water from the stream. Wild, unkempt hair framed a face that seemed more ghoul than human. Heart racing, I hurriedly grabbed the binoculars, pressing them against my eyes with such force that it bordered on painful. Frantically, I scanned the brook's vicinity, hoping to catch another glimpse. But the figure had vanished, leaving no trace of its eerie presence. How was it possible? No one could have made it here unnoticed. The island's secluded nature and our meticulous journey here, first by boat and then seaplane, made it nearly impossible for unwanted visitors. Overwhelmed by anxiety, I retreated from the window, every shadow now suspect. As the sunlight pierced through the attic, it painted a dance of shimmering dust particles in the air. The weight of unease grew more pressing, and then, like a discordant orchestra, the alarms of the house blared, rousing its inhabitants from slumber. This fortuitous timing meant one thing. I had to rush and tell my father about the unsettling sight that had shaken me to the core.